So you're finishing up with a degree in what?
Education and minor in political science.
So you got a teaching credential?
Got a teaching credential, and started working in Davison, Michigan, at teaching social studies and government there. And this is what really got me back into politics again, and got my interest back in politics again. Of course, JFK, I think, 1960, I think was sort of a peak for all of us, and got us interested. But I was teaching. I take my classes down to the local council meetings, and I'd only been there a couple of years when one of the commissioners had a heart attack, and came to me and says, "I'm not going to run. Why don't you run?" And I said, "Well, I've going to live here a couple of years." So he said, "I'll get your petition signed for you." And a little sidelight to this, he was the father of John Sinclair.
Okay.
John Sinclair, of note, who went to jail because he had 2 or 3 marijuana cigarettes. And he was very, very conservative. John Sinclair Sr. was, unlike Jr. And I taught next door to Elsie Sinclair, who was the mother of John Sinclair. But anyway, I went door to door, and there was 4 people, I think 4 or 5 people running for 2 seats, and nobody had really carried on a door-to-door campaign before. So even though I'd only lived there a couple of years, I did have a councilman supporting me, and I went door to door, and I got more votes than the other 3 or 4 combined. So that started my career again, and my interest again in politics.
This was on the Flint.
This was on the Davison City Council.
Davison
City Council in 1961.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did you serve there?
I served there, and after a couple of years teaching in Davison, I went to Flint because I got a raise of about $6,000 to go to Flint, where I was the only teacher in the system teaching all government. And then came the Constitutional Convention, total reinforcement, 1 man, 1 vote, and there was a district there that was normally Republican, but if you recall, 1964 was a great year for Democrats. So I put my name in the hat and won the primary, and then went on to win the general in 1964.
All right, 64. You had been teaching then in the Flint district.
I was teaching in the Flint district at the time.
Right, and you had sat on, but then had to leave the Davison Council when you moved to Flint Prison, or were you?
No, I was still on the Davison Council when, and I resigned from the council, of course, when I won the election.
Okay.
And Dale Kildee, who was another teacher in the city of Flint, he and I won at the same time and went into the legislature in January of '65. Interesting thing about this was the first 1 man, 1 vote legislature, 1965. 55 of us were freshman legislators.
Okay.
55.
Out of 110.
Out of 110. 1/2 was freshman legislators. The press got all hyped up to, oh, well, maybe the freshmen will take over. The 55 freshmen, both Democrats and Republicans, will get together and elect their own leadership and all that stuff. They tried to, they tried to get this thing going. Of course, that never happened, of course.
All right.
But it was an interesting thing. 55 people, first time in the legislature. And the legislature was different then than now. You had no staff at all, hardly. No telephones. There was 4 or 5 telephone booths back in the room back there, which is now the Thatcher room. And if you got a telephone call, they called you and then plugged you in. You went back and took your telephone call there. We had a secretary for about every 6 people. And we shared, and you didn't have much time with a secretary, especially if you had one guy that wanted to monopolize it, like Dale Kildee.
And I won't forget that.
Yeah, I won't forget that. And it was a totally, and it was a great experience, of course. Joe Kowalski, new speaker, first Democratic speaker in forever.
So that was 64, beginning
65, 66 session.
And so that was a Democratic majority.
Oh, we had 73 members.
Okay. Preceding year, how many?
48, 50, maybe. Something like that, yeah.
It went from about 50 to 70.
Well, the cows and the trees and the rocks were not voting anymore.
It all had to do with...
Before that, you'd have in the Upper Peninsula or Lower Peninsula, you'd have maybe 5,000 to 8,000 in a district, maybe.
Yes.
And maybe less than that in the Upper Peninsula. Down in the Detroit area, the suburban or the urban areas, you would have 25,000 in a district. Now this all changed, and of course that was a boon for Democrats because the urban area was now getting involved and was represented. So we had 73 members, and just one shy of the 2/3 majority needed, as a matter of fact.
All right. Where was Kowalski from?
Kowalski was from the Detroit area, from UAW. And he was quite a guy. Loyalty was big with him. And I always remember him for that. I always remember he had some kind of fungus, and he always had to wear white socks. You always see the old white socks. He called me in, he says, "Now, Crim," he said, "I know you've been a teacher." And he says, "Now, I've got a special thing for you, and I expect you to appreciate it. You're going to be vice chairman of House Education Committee." And that was his way of saying, "I'm going to do this for you. You better be loyal to me."
Yes.
Because he was big on loyalty, and he had a lot of these sessions in his room at night up till 11, 12 o'clock. We're in whole court kind of thing. He's quite a guy. The old line, Democrat, and coming out of the UAW.
He had been there prior to the '64 election.
Yeah, he was minority leader, as a matter of fact, I think, the year before.
Did you spend that term working on education things? Was that where you spent
a lot of it. This was the first time that we really began to look at the rich districts versus poor districts and the expenditure of educational funds.
The gap in spending.
The gap between the two. We had to develop, what we did was we had a 3-tier formula to attack it, because it needed to be attacked badly, because you had districts that could levy 1 mill and raise as much as another district that had to raise 8 or 10 mills to raise that much.
Because
it was
of the
that
value of the property.
valuation district of property and everything. So it took us a long time, and we fought hard on this, because there was a lot of people that were getting hurt. The rich district were getting hurt, the poor district were getting helped. And we finally passed it, and Cliff Smart, a Republican who later became minority leader, was very instrumental in getting that done as well. And we really did a lot of things on workers' comp, unemployment comp, that was years and years behind in that 65 and 66. I was also a chief sponsor of the Auxiliary Services Bill, which said that church schools and private schools would get help in busing, get help in school guard crossings, immunization, and things of this nature. And it was a very, very active 2 years, because the legislature, in our viewpoint, was years and years behind.
Okay, and when you say in our viewpoint, you're talking about a Democratic majority.
Yes.
At that point. What stands out as maybe the major accomplishment? Was it just the change in mood, or were there particular, I don't mean mood, but the change in orientation? Or?
It was tremendously different. I mean, it was like you went from the darkness into light almost. I mean, it was conservative to liberal all of a sudden, and there was so many problems that we, as the Democratic majority, felt that had to be addressed, and education was one of the chief ones.
Right.
I mean, this was so bad, and we had so many schools. We had so many K4, K6, K5s, and we began to consolidate those. We began the legislation that began to consolidate school districts, because you had these people going to K through 8s, and you had them K through 5 and so forth, and then you had small high schools that were graduating classes of 10, 12. What kind of an education could they get? What kind of curriculum could you offer? Could they become doctors, lawyers, engineers? They had no possibility of getting the background to get into college for those kind of things. So that was one of the things that we really started at that time as well.